On February 4, 2026, nearly 12 years after the mysterious disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, the world once again finds itself holding its breath. The aircraft, operated by Malaysia Airlines, vanished from radar on March 8, 2014, carrying 239 souls and leaving behind one of the greatest unanswered questions in aviation history. For years, the search zones shifted, budgets dried up, and public interest slowly faded, yet the ocean never gave up its secrets. Now, in early 2026, a renewed international search effort has been quietly but decisively launched, driven by new data correlations, improved deep-sea technology, and a growing consensus among independent investigators that the aircraft's final location may have been misunderstood from the very beginning. What makes this 2026 search different is not just the passage of time, but the convergence of multiple independent lines of evidence that were either unavailable or dismissed in earlier years. Advanced satellite data reanalysis, next-generation ocean current modeling, and unconventional signal intelligence methods have all pointed toward a refined search corridor in the southern Indian Ocean. Unlike previous missions that relied heavily on limited satellite handshakes, today's search incorporates artificial intelligence to reconstruct flight behavior, combining radar gaps, fuel endurance models, and atmospheric data to simulate thousands of possible end-of-flight scenarios. These simulations have narrowed the search area dramatically, reducing a once vast ocean into a zone small enough to be explored with unprecedented precision. Sources close to the operation indicate that autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with ultra-high-resolution sonar are now being deployed in regions that were either skipped or only partially scanned in earlier missions. Back in 2014 and 2015, large portions of the seabed were mapped using technology that, by today's standards, was limited in resolution and reliability. In contrast, the 2026 search uses machine learning-assisted seabed classification, capable of distinguishing man-made debris from natural formations even in extreme depths exceeding 6,000 meters. This technological leap has reignited hope among families who have waited over a decade for answers, many of whom believe that the truth was always within reach, but just beyond the capabilities of earlier searches. Another critical element driving the renewed effort is the re-evaluation of flight path assumptions. For years, official narratives focused on a narrow interpretation of satellite arcs, often excluding alternative maneuvering possibilities after the aircraft's transponder was disabled. New analytical models suggest that MH370 may have remained under partial control far longer than initially believed, potentially executing deliberate altitude and course changes that altered its final descent location. If correct, this challenges long-held conclusions and supports the idea that earlier search zones may have been offset by tens or even hundreds of kilometers. The 2026 mission is built on this premise, that small errors in early assumptions compounded into massive search miscalculations. Publicly, authorities remain cautious, avoiding definitive statements, yet behind closed doors the tone is notably different. Insiders describe the operation as the most confident search since 2014, not because certainty has been achieved, but because uncertainty has finally been constrained. Unlike previous attempts driven by political pressure or public demand, this mission is largely data-driven, guided by independent experts rather than rigid institutional narratives. It reflects a shift in mindset, from asking whether MH370 can still be found, to asking how soon it might finally be located. As this new chapter begins, the significance extends far beyond a single aircraft. Finding MH370 would not only bring closure to families, but would also reshape global aviation safety, surveillance, and accountability. The disappearance exposed blind spots in how aircraft are tracked over remote oceans, and despite technological advances since 2014, many of those vulnerabilities still exist today. The 2026 search is therefore more than a recovery mission. It is a reckoning with the limitations of modern aviation systems, and a test of whether humanity can correct its past failures using the tools of the future. This is where our story truly begins, not in 2014, but now in 2026, as the ocean is once again being searched with sharper eyes, deeper reach, and a renewed determination to uncover the truth. In the next part, we will dive into the exact technologies, newly analyzed signals, and previously ignored evidence that convinced experts this search is not just symbolic, but potentially the final and decisive attempt to solve the mystery of MH370. The renewed MH370 search of February 2026 did not emerge from a single discovery, but from a quiet accumulation of evidence that had been building for years beneath the surface of public attention. At the heart of this shift lies a fundamental reassessment of how the aircraft's final hours were interpreted. For more than a decade, the dominant narrative relied heavily on a simplified reading of satellite handshake data, assuming a largely straight and passive flight path after the aircraft disappeared from civilian radar. In 2026, independent analysts working alongside new generation data scientists have challenged this assumption, arguing that the data never demanded such simplicity, only that it was interpreted that way due to technical and institutional limitations at the time. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from reprocessing satellite timing data using modern computational models that simply did not exist in 2014. These models account for aircraft speed variability, altitude changes, atmospheric interference, and even satellite clock drift with far greater accuracy than earlier tools. When these factors were applied, the once rigid arcs that define the southern Indian Ocean search zone began to blur and shift. Instead of a single narrow corridor, analysts identified a dynamic movement envelope, suggesting that MH370 could have maneuvered laterally for extended periods without violating the raw satellite data. This revelation alone was enough to cast doubt on the precise placement of earlier search zones. Equally compelling was the renewed analysis of radar information from military and coastal installations across Southeast Asia. While much of this data remains classified, partial reconstructions shared with independent experts suggest that the aircraft's behavior after leaving Malaysian airspace was more complex than previously acknowledged. Subtle heading changes, altitude fluctuations, and timing inconsistencies indicate that the flight was not simply drifting on autopilot. In fact, several analysts now believe MH370 was actively navigated for hours after its disappearance, a conclusion that significantly alters predictions of where fuel exhaustion and final descent would have occurred. Another pillar of the 2026 search theory comes from unconventional signal intelligence, particularly the analysis of weak radio frequency disturbances detected during the aircraft's final window of flight. These signals, once dismissed as background noise, have now been correlated with aircraft movement patterns using machine learning techniques. When mapped against time and location, they appear to align with a moving object consistent with a large commercial aircraft traveling deep into the southern Indian Ocean. While this method is still controversial, its results closely match the revised satellite-based models, lending unexpected support to a search zone that had previously been considered unlikely. Oceanographic science has also played a crucial role in reshaping expectations. Earlier debris drift models were constrained by limited current data and broad assumptions about floating material behavior. In contrast, 2026 models incorporate high-resolution historical current simulations, wind field reconstructions, and object-specific buoyancy decay rates. When known MH370 debris discoveries were remodeled using these improved systems, many of them traced back not to the officially searched areas, but to regions farther south and west. This backward drift analysis has become one of the strongest arguments that the aircraft's final resting place lies outside the zones that were exhaustively scanned between 2015 and 2018. Behind the scenes, these findings triggered intense debate among aviation authorities, scientists, and policymakers. Publicly, caution remains the official stance, but privately, the tone has shifted toward acknowledgement that earlier conclusions may have been premature. The 2026 search is therefore not framed as a repetition of past efforts, but as a correction, a chance to apply today's tools to yesterday's mystery without the political pressures that once shaped official narratives. This distinction is critical because it explains why funding, technology, and international cooperation have aligned once again after years of hesitation. For the families of those lost aboard the aircraft operated by Malaysia Airlines, this renewed effort represents more than technical progress. It represents validation. For years, many relatives argued that unanswered questions remained buried beneath bureaucratic certainty. The 2026 initiative implicitly acknowledges those doubts. recognizing that closure cannot be declared while credible evidence continues to point elsewhere. This emotional dimension has quietly influenced decision-makers, reinforcing the resolve to pursue the search to its logical conclusion, rather than abandoning it once again. As Part 2 closes, one reality becomes clear. The 2026 search is not driven by hope alone, but by convergence. Independent data streams, satellite analysis, radar reassessment, signal intelligence, and ocean science are pointing in the same general direction. That convergence has narrowed uncertainty to its smallest margin since 2014. In the next part, we will explore the exact new search zone, the vessels and deep-sea technology being deployed, and why experts believe this mission could finally locate MH370 on the ocean floor. By early February 2026, the focus of the MH370 investigation had shifted decisively from theory to execution. After years of data refinement, expert debate, and quiet coordination, a specific region of the southern Indian Ocean emerged as the primary target of the renewed search. Unlike earlier efforts that spanned hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, this new zone is significantly more compact, shaped by overlapping evidence rather than single-source assumptions. Analysts describe it not as a guess, but as the most statistically defensible estimate of the aircraft's final resting place ever produced. Every kilometer of this area was selected because multiple independent models converged there, reducing the margin for error that plagued previous missions. At the center of this operation are autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, representing a dramatic leap forward from the technology used a decade earlier. These robotic systems are capable of operating continuously for days at extreme depths, navigating complex seabed terrain without human intervention. Equipped with ultra-high-frequency side-scan sonar, they can detect objects as small as a suitcase from several hundred meters away, even in total darkness and crushing pressure. In earlier searches, similar terrain may have concealed wreckage beneath ridges, sediment waves, or volcanic formations, but the 2026 systems are specifically designed to distinguish artificial shapes from natural geology with far greater confidence. The seabed itself is one of the greatest challenges of the mission. The targeted region lies in an area known for its rugged underwater landscape, characterized by steep escarpments, deep trenches, and scattered debris fields created by geological activity over millions of years. 2015 and 2016, much of this terrain was either poorly mapped or scanned at resolutions that would today be considered insufficient. The new mission revisits these zones using multi-pass scanning techniques, meaning each section of seabed is surveyed multiple times from different angles. This approach dramatically reduces the risk that wreckage could be missed due to shadowing or unfavorable sonar geometry. What has further increased confidence in the 2026 search is the integration of real-time data analysis. As AUVs transmit sonar imagery back to command vessels, artificial intelligence systems immediately analyze the data, flagging anomalies that match the expected dimensions and fragmentation patterns of a Boeing 777. These alerts allow human experts to review potential targets within hours rather than weeks, enabling rapid redeployment of vehicles for closer inspection. This real-time feedback loop did not exist during earlier searches, where data often had to be processed long after survey vessels had already left the area. The operational leadership behind this mission comes from a specialized maritime exploration firm with extensive experience in deep ocean recovery. While officials remain cautious in public statements, industry insiders confirm that Ocean Infinity is once again playing a central role, this time with a far more refined mandate. Unlike its earlier involvement, which was constrained by predefined search boundaries, the 2026 operation allows for adaptive decision-making. If credible targets are detected just outside the initial zone, the mission can expand organically, guided by evidence rather than contractual limitations. Equally important is the mission's emphasis on transparency and independent oversight. Data gathered during the search is being reviewed not only by company analysts, but also by a panel of international experts in aviation, oceanography, and signal intelligence. This multidisciplinary review process is designed to prevent premature conclusions and ensure that any potential discovery is validated across multiple domains. After years of criticism over secrecy and fragmented communication, the 2026 search represents a deliberate shift toward openness, aimed at restoring trust among families and the wider public. As the search vessels move methodically across the ocean floor, tension continues to build. Every new sonar image carries the possibility of ending one of aviation's longest mysteries. For the families of those aboard the aircraft operated by Malaysia's national carrier, the silence of the ocean has lasted long enough. The 2026 mission is their strongest hope yet, not because it promises certainty, but because it finally applies the full weight of modern science to a question left unanswered for more than a decade. Part 3 ends with the search fully underway, machines descending into darkness, and experts watching closely as the seabed reveals its secrets inch by inch. In the next part, we will examine what happens if wreckage is detected, how identification would be confirmed, and what the discovery of MH370 would mean for aviation safety, accountability, and the official narrative that has stood since 2014. If MH370 is detected during the 2026 search, the process that follows will be as critical as the discovery itself. Finding an object on the seabed is only the beginning. Confirming that it belongs to the missing aircraft requires a methodical and cautious sequence of verification steps. Sonar anomalies identified by autonomous underwater vehicles are first rescanned from multiple angles to rule out geological formations or unrelated debris. Once a target consistently matches the size, geometry, and fragmentation pattern expected of a wide-body aircraft, remotely operated vehicles are deployed to descend into the darkness and visually inspect the site in high-definition detail. These remotely operated vehicles, equipped with powerful lighting systems and precision cameras, allow investigators to examine serial number-bearing components, structural layouts, and damage patterns without disturbing the site. Even small details, such as the curvature of fuselage sections or the configuration of landing gear, can quickly distinguish a commercial airliner from other wreckage. In the case of MH370, confirmation would likely come from identifying unique elements associated with a Boeing 777, such as specific engine components, wing structures, or avionics housings that are unmistakable to aviation experts. Once visual confirmation is achieved, the implications are immediate and profound. The discovery would officially end more than a decade of uncertainty surrounding the aircraft operated by Malaysia Airlines, providing the first definitive answers about where the flight ended and how it came to rest on the ocean floor. For families who have lived with unanswered questions since 2014, this moment would mark the transition from speculation to truth. While recovery of the entire aircraft may not be feasible due to depth and fragmentation, even partial recovery of key components would be sufficient to reconstruct the final moments of the flight. Investigators would then focus on damage analysis to determine whether the aircraft impacted the ocean at high speed, descended in a controlled glide, or broke apart during descent. The orientation and spread of debris on the seabed can reveal whether the aircraft struck the water intact or fragmented midair. A compact debris field might suggest a steep, high-energy impact, while a wider distribution could indicate structural breakup before impact. These physical clues are critical, as they directly challenge or support long-standing theories about what happened during the aircraft's final minutes. Beyond the technical findings, a confirmed discovery would force a re-examination of the official narrative that has shaped public understanding for years. Earlier conclusions about flight behavior, fuel exhaustion, and impact location would be measured against physical evidence for the first time. Any discrepancies between the wreckage analysis and previous assumptions would raise difficult questions about how the investigation was conducted, why certain data interpretations dominated, and whether alternative theories were dismissed too quickly. The 2026 discovery would therefore not just answer old questions, it would create new ones about accountability and decision-making. The ripple effects would extend far beyond this single case. Aviation authorities worldwide would reassess aircraft tracking standards, emergency response protocols, and the transparency of accident investigations. MH370 exposed fundamental gaps in global flight monitoring, particularly over remote oceanic regions. And while improvements have been made since 2014, a confirmed wreckage site would provide concrete evidence of how those gaps manifested in real-world consequences. Lessons drawn from the discovery would likely influence policy, technology adoption, and international cooperation for decades to come. As Part 4 closes, the stakes could not be higher. The search is no longer just about finding metal on the ocean floor, it is about confronting the truth, however uncomfortable it may be. With wreckage potentially identified and confirmation procedures underway, the world would stand on the edge of closure and revelation. In the final part, we will explore the emotional aftermath for families, the global reaction, and whether MH370's mystery truly ends with discovery, or if it opens a deeper chapter in aviation history. If the discovery of MH370 is confirmed in 2026, the impact will extend far beyond the technical and investigative realms, reaching deeply into the emotional lives of the families who have waited for answers for nearly 12 years. For them, the absence of certainty has been a wound that never healed, no wreckage to mourn, no final resting place to acknowledge, and no definitive explanation to accept. Closure in this context does not mean relief from grief, but the end of a long and painful suspension between hope and despair. Knowing where the aircraft came to rest would finally allow families to grieve with truth rather than imagination, replacing endless questions with a somber but solid reality. Around the world, the reaction would be immediate and intense. News outlets would interrupt regular programming, governments would issue statements, and aviation authorities would face renewed scrutiny. The aircraft operated by Malaysia Airlines would once again become the center of global attention, not as a symbol of mystery, but as a case study in how modern systems can fail and how they can improve. Public discussion would quickly move from "where is MH370" to "how did this happen and how do we ensure it never happens again?" The discovery would close one chapter of aviation history while opening another focused on accountability and reform. In the months following confirmation, investigators would likely publish a final report grounded not in inference, but in physical evidence. This report would reshape long-standing theories, validating some assumptions while dismantling others. Certain narratives that dominated public discourse for years may be quietly retired, replaced by conclusions drawn directly from the wreckage itself. For many observers, this would be a sobering reminder that certainty declared too early can obscure the truth rather than reveal it. MH370's story would stand as a cautionary tale about the dangers of premature conclusions in complex investigations. The legacy of MH370 would also be felt in the technology that governs global aviation. Since 2014, improvements in satellite tracking, real-time aircraft monitoring, and emergency beacon standards have already been implemented, but a confirmed discovery would accelerate further change. Airlines, regulators, and manufacturers would be forced to confront the reality that an aircraft should never again be able to disappear without trace. The lessons learned from MH370 would influence international policy, pushing the industry toward continuous global tracking and greater transparency in accident investigations. Yet even with answers, the story of MH370 would never fully end. It would live on in documentaries, classrooms, and training manuals, serving as both a mystery solved and a warning remembered. For the families, memorials would finally have a place grounded in truth rather than uncertainty. For the public, the case would remain a powerful reminder of the limits of technology and the cost of human error, institutional hesitation, and unanswered questions. As the ocean settles once more into silence, the search vessels would eventually depart, their mission complete. What remains is not just wreckage on the seabed, but a legacy written into aviation history. MH370 would no longer be defined solely by its disappearance, but by what humanity learned in the long journey to find it. In that sense, the final chapter is not about loss alone. It is about responsibility, remembrance, and the enduring need to seek the truth, no matter how deep it lies.